Okay, so the topic I want to talk about today is an AuthorTube topic, and it has to do with the growth that I have undergone from when I first discovered writing in my little black composition books to where I am now writing on a daily basis, and the changes that I've undergone over those years and how people are not the same at 15, 16, and 17 as they are when they become older adults. So I'm going to talk about that, and it might sound a little bit rambly at some points, but stick with me because it might be interesting and you might get something out of it. So when I first started writing, it was way back in high school, and I was a much more introverted person back then, and writing was a way of expression. And I've often said about writing that it's exercise for the imagination, and I always approached it that way. I always approached it as the things that I was uncomfortable saying out loud to people, approaching people. Those are the things that I used my composition books, a pen, a paper, and just started writing, letting the imagination run wild. And that was my form of expression. I used to keep a journal for a time back in my high school days, and sometimes I look back on it and I wish I continued to keep that journal, but unfortunately I didn't. It was a phase for about probably 2 years, and I look back on some of those journals and I think, wow, because it's a snapshot, if you will, of where I was at a given time in history. And so when I started writing creatively, I started mainly just doing rambling stuff about teenagers going through difficult, challenging times and how they coped with those challenging times and how some teenagers reacted in certain ways, sometimes positive, sometimes negative, with their actions based on the situations that they find themselves in. And then as I got older, I started to get more of a passion for sports, and I started to put the pieces of the puzzle together because I had gotten into journalism, and I started to write more about the things that I was experiencing, the things that I was seeing, the things that were familiar to me, like is the case for probably most writers. And so I started writing more fiction stories that had sports angles to them. And I just kind of had this vision that I was going to be this premier sports fiction writer at some point, and I was inspired by books that I've read. You've heard me on this channel talk about One-on-One by Tabitha King. Now, she's not necessarily a sports fiction person, but that one did have a significant sports angle, and it was one of the books that really inspired me to start writing. And I started reading other authors like Mike Lupica, who was a sports journalist, columnist, media personality, and he wrote a lot of sports fiction, and so I started reading that. And then there's some other people that wrote sports fiction, and so I was really into that, and I was writing that all the time as I got a little bit older, and I was probably late teens, early 20s, and that phase actually extended for quite a long time into my 30s. So I know I'm right on the edge of giving my age away, and not that it really matters, but I'm obviously over 30, as you can tell by the white in my beard. Then as I got into my 30s, I started to get more into the convergence of sports and social justice. And then as I got a little bit older and I started to get more into the social justice issues, and I actually started to move away from sports a little bit, although some of my stories, there still is a sports component, but not nearly as much as it used to be. There was a time when I was in my 20s, and if you went through a bazillion composition books that I have stacked right in back of this camera that you can't see, I wrote a lot of stories that pretty much all of them were like, not just was sports as a kind of a small part of it, but rather as a significant part of what I was actually doing. And then as I started to kind of move along from sports being so primary to sports being an element, and I started to move into social justice, and I started to move into racial issues. And again, a lot of it is being influenced by what's happening around us in the world. in the country, in your state, in your county, in your city, and you start to see the things that are going on, and you start to maybe look at how ways that you tell a story in fiction can really help make a greater point. And I thought about this a little bit more as I watched the Nate Parker film American Skin. I bought it on pay-per-view, and it was through Amazon Prime, and I had it there, and I wasn't ready to watch it. And then when the George Floyd verdict was coming down, I decided that maybe it was time for me to watch that movie. And I watched it, and I think I watched it maybe the day before, maybe the night before the verdict, the day or night before the verdict. And it was a powerful story. If you have not seen that movie and you're emotionally equipped and ready, I would definitely urge you to check that out. The writing is just brilliant, how it comes full circle. And if you're not paying attention, you get to the end and there's something that happens at the end that's very jarring. But if you, for those of you who are writers, you'll pick up on it pretty quick. Those of you who are savvy readers, you'll pick up on it really quick, what the writer was trying to say as the story kind of comes full circle. So I started writing more about social justice type topics just because it was important. And then I had some stories. I was writing some LGBTQ plus stories, and it was my evolution in terms of my thinking and the things that I'm experiencing, but it's also the way the world around us has transformed from what it was when I was a teenager, and I first started writing in those composition books, to where I am right now, where you can talk to text and you don't even have to actually type anymore to write stories. So how far have we come from me having a big pen and a composition book and having to write it longhand? Not that I didn't use my computer, and not that I couldn't use the computer, but at that time, writing longhand with the composition books and the pen, that was just comfortable for me. So the point is that, and you're probably like, is this fool ever gonna make a point? Yeah, I actually am gonna make a point. The point is that you learn and you grow. And part of how you learn and grow is by paying attention to what's around you, not having a tunnel vision, looking at the world all around you and learning how this affects you and how can you express yourself. How can you get things off your chest, especially if you're in a job where you can't necessarily speak your mind? And for me, working in public relations, it's a little bit more difficult. We can't say a lot of the things that we think the way other people in other jobs can. People that have, FU money, and they can just say whatever they want because they don't have to worry as much about the repercussions of what their words can mean. So pay attention to what's going on in the world around you as a writer. Not just the things that are obvious, but the things that are not so obvious. The people who are quietly struggling, the groups that are quietly struggling, the challenges that we are all experiencing, or many of us are experiencing, that we're ignoring because they don't rise to the level of some of the other challenges that we're seeing. And so I'm a different person now, obviously, than I was at 15, 16 years old. And that's because I'm the product of my experiences. And I hope that you are a different person. Those of you who are reading this, if you're in your 30s or you're in your 40s or 50s or whatever you are, that you are a much different person, hopefully a better person for the experiences that you've had from when you were 14, 15, and 16 to where you are now, perhaps in your late 20s, early 30s, late 30s, early 40s, 50s, 60s, whatever. Learn from what's happening around you and express yourself. Look at the stories that are out there. A lot of people struggle to find stories, but they're right there in front of your face if you just have your eyes open, you're paying attention, and you're willing to take that next big step, and you're willing to keep learning and to keep growing.